I just turned 40 a couple months ago, and I grew up with 90s music. I've heard some people say this could be the last great decade of music, and I'm not quite sure if that's true, but I've always been fascinated with things like top 10 albums of the year or top 50 albums of the century, that sort of thing. And I actually found a list that caught my interest, which was the top 200 albums of the 90s. The list was put together by Digital Dream Door and would have been quite an undertaking when you think about all the different genres that were competing with each other through the 90s. But they went for it and they did put together their top 200 list. And I decided throughout last year that I was going to listen to every single album in order on this list. And I thought that'd be interesting doing that in the context of me being 40 now and not a teenager. I thought that there might be some albums that I might not have liked so much that I like now, or vice versa, or maybe even find some new hidden gems. I'm not going to review album by album, especially when I can just link it in the description, and I'm sure Josh at some point is putting the link up on the video about now. But I did want to talk about 10 different things that I guess I came away with after listening to all 200 of these albums. The biggest takeaway is probably a thought I've had in my head maybe the last 4 or 5 years, but was very much reinforced after going back and listening to all these albums from my childhood, is that the number one thing I'm looking for to enjoy an album or a song is whether or not it's fun to listen to in that moment. And I know that's a little bit of a stupid thing to say, or maybe an obvious thing to say, but what I mean is that at the ripe, soft old age of 40, I'm no longer really looking for technical skill or necessarily a cerebral experience or even sometimes even an emotional experience. These three things are great to have in songs, but the first and foremost thing is I need it to be fun to listen to in and of itself. Takeaway two, I don't think this shocks anybody, but the top album was Nirvana, Nevermind, which I believe most of the time does dominate these 90s albums lists. And honestly, I do think it deserves it. I know at this point in time, Nirvana's looked at a little bit more cynically, where there seemed to be a little bit overrated for the time. And there might be a little bit of that, but honestly, it was one of the more enjoyable albums to listen to, even in hindsight, even after probably like a million other listens to before. Takeaway three, albums back in the 90s were actually quite a bit more repetitive than I remembered, and also much more repetitive than albums nowadays. The different artists and different bands and different singers really stuck to their own genre for the most part. There was a couple of notable exceptions. Korn was one, Ice Cube probably another, but for the most part, if you bought an album of an artist, you really knew what to expect going into it. The next thing I came away with, and this actually shocked me quite a bit as someone who grew up mostly on alternative music, is that the hip hop albums in the 90s, I think on average, age quite a bit better. There is a little bit of an asterisk. I think the top albums of the 90s are probably mostly rock albums. But when you go to more like the middle of the pack, like as you get to number 20 and below, the hip hop albums really stand the test of time in a way that a lot of the alternative and rock albums just don't. Takeaway 5 has a part A and a part B to it. 5A, I guess I'll call it, is that the ideal running time, I think I've learned for an album for me, is about 40 minutes. There's a lot of reasons for it. There's a lot of things competing for my attention now that I'm 40. But also, it seems like the ideal amount of time for an artist to make their musical point before wrapping things up. On the flip side of things, double CDs are actually a little bit miserable to listen to. Even Melancholy and Infinite Sadness, I know that's everyone's favorite example of a really good double album, but honestly, listening to it front to back felt mostly like a chore, to me anyway. I know it's a great album, but it really felt like it should have been a bit shorter. Takeaway 6, country music gets completely disrespected on this list, with only Bonnie Raitt representing the genre, who is more of a blues artist, so even that feels a little bit like a slap in the face. It's so funny in hindsight because I remember growing up, me, my friends, I didn't know anybody who liked country music. We actively hated it. But you look to today, 2025 and even the couple years before, country music really is the top influencer in the charts in general. It's probably the most popular music we have right now. And it's really funny when you look back in the 90s with mega superstars like Shania Twain, who I think went 1,000 times platinum, just doesn't even get a little piece of this list. So the next thing that really jumped out to me about this list, and this was originally my inspiration for even taking this on, Kid Rock was number 95. When I saw this on the list initially, I thought there was no way that there were only 94 albums better than Kid Rock. That just didn't compute to me. It sounds very wrong. And it is wrong. It's not a good album. But you know what? It's actually not that bad. I'm not saying it's a top 200 listen, but it was quite a bit better than I expected it to be, which I know is a severe backhanded compliment, but it stuck with me. So there were a few very popular grunge bands, Alice in Chains, Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, who takes up about 7 or 8 spots on the list. And these are all very widely loved bands, especially at this point. But I have to say, they were not fun to go back and listen to. It shocked me quite a bit, especially Alice in Chains, who I think at this point is more widely known to be probably, the best grunge band of the 90s. But going back and listening to the album straight through, it really didn't do much for me. I'm not sure if it's just me growing out of it or if it's just how repetitive it was listening to them almost one after another. But Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains, none of them did anything for me at 40. On the other side of the coin, two groups I really didn't like that much growing up, Rage Against the Machine and Beastie Boys. They got about 4 or 5 albums on the top 200 list, and I really enjoyed every single one of them. The last thing I noticed going through all 200 of these albums, and this one shocked me quite a bit as someone who's always advocated for listening to full albums as a full experience, but how strong the singles were on each album really influenced my perception of the album as a whole 25, 30 years later. This only really affected, I believe, the records that I wasn't as familiar with. But at the same time, if there was a single that I could really attach to the album before I listened to it, or had something in my head or something I could sing along to at some point in the listen, it really did end up making the album as a whole quite a bit more enjoyable by a disproportional amount, I'm going to say. That's my full list of takeaways from listening to the top 200 90s albums from Digital Door. If you've lasted this long, thank you so much. I appreciate you witnessing in semi-real time me devolving into old grandpa who can't stop rambling. And I hope to be doing this channel for quite a bit longer. And thank you for listening to me yap.